20 years ago, the IRA and Loyalist paramilitaries declared an end to the so-called war that claimed the lives of more than 3,000 people. Their historic ceasefires marked the beginning of the road to peace that Northern Ireland enjoys today. I've been covering the conflict for more than 40 years, and I never dreamt it would have been so utterly transformed from a war zone to somewhere that looks just like any other part of the UK. I also never imagined I'd see the remarkable sight of the Republican and Unionist extremes, Sinn Féin and the Democratic Unionist Party, sharing political power at Stormont.
What's the current state of your relationship with the Deputy First Minister?
What it always was. no change.
Very good.
Not an inch and no surrender.
The former IRA commander Martin McGuinness having an audience with the Queen as Deputy First Minister is an astonishing illustration of just how far things have come. So how did this near miraculous transition from war to peace come about? I've made almost 100 documentaries on the conflict, and this year I've come back to meet again many of the people I've talked to over the years. I'm going to show them clips of what they said then and ask them how they feel about where we are today.
If they're going to do that to us, we're going to do this to you. So you tell them to stop.
When you look at that now.
What's wrong?
We don't believe that winning elections and winning any amount of votes will bring freedom in Ireland. At the end of the day, it will be the cutting edge of the IRA which will bring freedom.
Was it the cutting edge of the IRA that in the end brought what you would describe as freedom?
It is often argued that the British came to the negotiating table specifically because of an ongoing IRA campaign.
I want to talk to all sides, from paramilitaries to politicians, and ask them whom they think were the winners and the losers. But in the end, I want to reach my own conclusion. Who really did win the war?
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Abellio Great Transit. Passengers to Genesis Stratford. This is your 11:38 service for Norwich. Calling Chelmsford, Colchester.
When I first began to cover Northern Ireland, the last thing on people's minds in the rest of the United Kingdom was the escalating conflict on the other side of the Irish Sea. Friends in England ask why I'm still reporting the conflict. Isn't it all sorted since the ceasefires, they ask. But all sorted it is not. In some places, normality seems a veneer to hide the powerful undercurrents of bitterness and resentment that have never gone away. I've seen many Loyalist bonfires over the years, but this is, without exception, the biggest Loyalist bonfire that I've ever set eyes upon. In July, during the annual marching season, I visited the Loyalist heartland of Belfast's Shankill Road. Giant bonfires tower towards the sky, celebrating Protestants' ancient victory over Catholics at the Battle of the Boyne in 1690. This year, the bonfires are bigger than ever, symbolising Loyalist discontent.
There's two sides in this country. We are allowed nothing and they get everything.
Why are the feelings so intense and the hostility so deep? That's what many people back in England,
They don't understand.
Because no one can let go of their past.
Around the bonfire burned raw anger, given how the tables have turned with Martin McGuinness now sharing power at Stormont. The Union is as secure as it has ever been, so what are you worried about?
No.
The Union will not change unless the majority of the people of Northern Ireland,
Yes.
which is your majority...
And to be fair, they're breeding like rabbits, so 50 years down the line it might change.
Well, if it changes because the majority want it to change, that's okay, isn't it?
No.
Why are there Sinn Féin posters of Sinn
Well, the
Féin
Sinn
politicians?
Féin
They're
is-
not the most favourite of people.
They're
They're in government, Deputy Prime Minister, and he's been in jail during the Troubles. know an IRA man in Londonderry.
Martin McGuinness has come a long way since I first met him in the troubled streets of Londonderry 42 years ago. I'd arrived here just a few hours after 13 Catholics marching for civil rights had been shot dead by British paratroopers on the day that became known as Bloody Sunday. I remember 2 days after Bloody Sunday, or thereabouts, standing here, perhaps it was over by those railings, and I was talking to John Hume from the SDLP, the Social Democratic and Labour Party, who were the moderate, non-violent Catholic politicians. And I remember John Hume saying to me, "The person you want to watch is that young man over there. His name is Martin McGuinness." John Hume was right, and his words were prophetic. When did you join the IRA?
I joined the IRA in 1970.
Did your mother know that you joined the IRA?
No, not initially. She didn't know. She
You didn't tell her? You didn't tell her?
Oh no, I absolutely didn't tell her. Didn't tell either of my parents. But my mother found, I think it was a blackberry or something like that in the house, and immediately traumatized her, I think, yeah.
Did your mother produce the berry and say, "What's this, Martin?"
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. She didn't hit me with it or anything like that. Or if there were gloves, there was no smack across the face with the gloves. No, I think that it was a moment in time, and she was obviously annoyed at the prospect that all of our lives were changing, and maybe mine's more dramatically than anybody else's.
Dramatic change is part of Ireland's tortured history. After partition in 1921, Northern Ireland was established as a Protestant state for a Protestant people, with a Protestant parliament at Stormont. Catholics were second-class citizens, victims of blatant discrimination. On Bloody Sunday, they were marching to demand equal rights and an end to internment without trial.
Do not fire back for the moment, unless you identify a positive target.
20 years on, I interviewed one of those soldiers who wished to remain anonymous.
I changed from an ordinary scoop-up arrest operation to, hey, someone's trying to kill me. He looks for targets. Started identifying them and started dropping them.
Started dropping them?
Shooting them.
Do you stand by what you told me then?
Oh yes, 100%. If I had to do the same thing again, I would do it.
No regrets?
No regrets.
Martin McGuinness and his colleagues would say that you have blood in your hands, the blood of innocent civilians.
I've got blood in my hands, yes, but not of innocent civilians. What I did correctly.
Catholics saw Bloody Sunday as a massacre of the innocents. 40 years later, Lord Savile, who'd investigated the killings, broadly agreed, accusing some of the soldiers of fabricating accounts to justify their actions. Are you one of those soldiers?
No way. I told the truth as I seen it that day. He cherry-picked the information to prove his point.
Did you believe that you were fighting a war?
Yes. When people are getting killed around you, you're fighting a war.
The wound of Bloody Sunday is still open, despite the government's attempt to heal it.
The government is ultimately responsible for the conduct of the armed forces, and for that, on behalf of the government, indeed on behalf of our country, I am deeply sorry.
Whereas Republicans see the Savile inquiry as delivering justice, many loyalists see it as a sop to Sinn Féin. Despite the ongoing sensitivities, I've always regarded Bloody Sunday as the seminal event that gave the conflict its impetus. That was the moment when the IRA's real war began. Demands for civil rights were now drowned out by the sound of guns and bombs. the beginning of a concerted military campaign to end British involvement in the north and unify Ireland.
Many young people who hadn't previously contemplated being involved in the IRA then decided that they would take that very dramatic step.
The high moral ground went, in some people's eyes, to the IRA and Sinn Féin as a result of what happened on Bloody Sunday. They were given a credibility and a standing within the community, which they used to great effect and are still using. And that directly resulted from the trauma of all those dead bodies on the streets in Derry.
What's the step?
Okay. Today, Catholics enjoy equal rights with Protestants, and Stormont is no longer the secure citadel of unionism. Here we are on the balcony of Stormont, and there is the statue to Sir Edward Carson, the symbol of Protestant Unionist Loyalist resistance. What that statue says to me is, Ulster will fight, Ulster will be right, no surrender. What would he think if he knew you were here now and what you were?
Well, it really doesn't even remotely concern me what he would think. What concerns me is what present day unionist leaders think. They're the people that I have to work with.
According to a Gallup poll we've commissioned for this programme,
nearly 30 years ago, I chaired a studio discussion in which Peter Robinson, now First Minister, accused the then government of giving in to the IRA.
The reward is given to the terrorists and the reward is given to the boycotter.
Hasn't the reward today been given to the so-called terrorist, with the former IRA leader, Martin McGuinness, now being your deputy? Isn't that their reward?
I think the distinction between the two is that Martin McGuinness and Sinn Féin have a mandate from the nationalist Republican community. There's a difference between giving somebody a position in the politics of Northern Ireland because they have a mandate, and giving somebody a role in the politics of Northern Ireland because they threaten violence or actually carry out violence.
The Queen has made an extraordinary, if more regal, journey too, inviting the Deputy First Minister to a banquet at Windsor Castle. Neither of us would ever have anticipated Martin McGuinness dining with the Queen, would we?
No, I think that the men in white coats would have taken both of us away. There is a much greater maturity about our acceptance of the identity and what's important to each of the sections of our community, and that's as much a case for myself as it is for Martin McGuinness.
Queen Elizabeth has many reasons not to meet with me. I have many reasons not to meet with her. But as Deputy First Minister, I thought it was important to take the opportunity to, through her, reach out the hand of friendship to the unionist people of the North.
Uachtaráin agus a coide.
But the unlikely love affair between Sinn Féin and the British monarchy has only fuelled loyalist fears that the union with Britain is being undermined. Like the IRA, loyalist paramilitaries resorted to violence to keep the union secure. In 1972, Jackie MacDonald joined the paramilitary Ulster Defence Association. Why did you and so many other young loyalists join the UDA at the time?
Well, there was so much going on, and it was building up and building up. And when I joined, it wasn't long after Bloody Friday.
Bloody Friday was the day in July 1972 when the IRA planted 23 bombs in the heart of Belfast. 9 people died and 130 were injured. Like Bloody Sunday for the IRA, Bloody Friday was a powerful recruiting agent for loyalist paramilitaries.
Some of my best friends are killers, and they took the fight to the Republicans. to show that the IRA wasn't this invincible army, you know, and it was to terrorise the terrorist.
But it wasn't just Republicans who were targeted. Ordinary, innocent Catholics were targeted and murdered by...
Yes, and that happened both ways, Peter.
By loyalists.
Yep, but it happened both ways.
I just want to show you a clip of what you told me when I interviewed you last time. Billy Hutchinson is a former member of the paramilitary Ulster Volunteer Force and now leads the Loyalist Progressive Unionist Party. He was sentenced to life for murder committed in 1974. At this junction at 7:30 morning, the UVF drove by and shot dead 2 young Catholics. Do you regret your part in the murder of those 2 young men?
No, I don't have any regrets for anything I've done. I believe that I was a part of a war and that war had to be fought.
What do you think when you see that now?
I regret every life that was taken and everybody who was injured during the conflict. I suppose in many ways I wish that the conflict had never happened, but it did. And many young men were driven by that notion that the IRA had to be stopped and that the British government were going to do it.
I remember watching loyalist paramilitaries emerge from the shadows in the early 1970s as the IRA campaign intensified.
Have you any idea who these people are?
No, I don't.
You frightened?
No, I'm not indeed. I'm glad to see them round here.
Why?
Because I am. I think it's about time our one started to do something.
There's a message to the IRA. If they're going to do that to us, we're going to do this to you. So you tell them to stop.
When you look at that now,
What's wrong?
killing
Looking back.
innocent Catholics.
Killing anybody. Looking back, there was a different way of doing things. Violence only gets you so far. The Provisional IRA realised that, and they turned to the ballot box, they turned to democracy, and it has taken them a long way.
Adams, Jerry, Sinn Féin, 15,072 votes.
In 2011, Sinn Féin's leader was elected to the Irish Parliament. Being in government north and south is no longer a pipe dream for Republicans. They see it as a step to achieving Sinn Féin's ultimate goal of a united Ireland.
Sinn Féin is now the largest party in terms of votes on the island of Ireland. We're the biggest party on the island of Ireland. But it's what we do with that.
This is the grave of Bobby Sands, the man from whom Sinn Féin's electoral success initially stemmed. Bobby Sands died after 66 days on hunger strike in the H blocks of the Maze prison, and crucially, after he had become a Westminster MP. Indirectly, Bobby Sands gave the IRA its long-term strategy of the Armalite and the ballot box.
The government insists that the men in these cells are common criminals sentenced by due process of law. The prisoners say they're prisoners of war. To both sides, the issue at stake is one of principle. That's the real reason for the conflict here in the H blocks.
9 more Republican hunger strikers followed Bobby Sands to their graves. The political consequences were seismic. The hunger strike and Bobby Sands died in May 1981, which I remember covering. And I never thought that Bobby Sands would go through with it. It was no ordinary death, and Sands was no ordinary prisoner, no ordinary man, because he was an elected member of Parliament. The sheer scale of Sands' victory stunned Margaret Thatcher's government. His 30,000 votes gave the lie to the Prime Minister's scathing dismissal of IRA prisoners.
There can be no question of political status for someone who is serving a sentence for crime. Crime is crime is crime. It is not political, it is crime.
Mrs. Thatcher never really understood what the problem was.
James Pryor, never Mrs. Thatcher's darling at the best of times, was exiled to Northern Ireland to end the hunger strikes. Did you regard the IRA prisoners as terrorists?
It's a very difficult question to answer. I obviously felt they were close to terrorism, particularly when they tried to kill me. But there was a deeper side to it, as well as it were, a terrorist side.
By standing firm and allowing the hunger strikers to die, Mrs. Thatcher inadvertently turned them into martyrs. With the benefit of hindsight, I wondered whether Lord Pryor believed her intransigence affected the final outcome of the conflict. Who won the war?
I know we didn't win it, but I'm not certain the other side won it. As time went on, it became possible for both sides to get into a position where it was easier to make peace.
Than make war.
Than make war.
The hunger strikes and Bobby Sands' election to Westminster were the watershed that indicated the ballot box might be as powerful a weapon as the Armalite.
The evidence that there was strong support for the prisoners brought about a huge discussion within Republicanism about what we would do in the context of the Assembly elections, which would take place the following year in 1982, the first elections that I ever stood for. I realised that it was only through building Sinn Féin up to be a major positive political force that we would make progress.
We don't believe that winning elections and winning any amount of votes will bring freedom in Ireland. At the end of the day, it will be the cutting edge of the IRA which will bring freedom.
Was it the cutting edge of the IRA that in the end brought what you would describe as freedom?
It is often argued that the British came to the negotiating table specifically because of what was happening in regard to an ongoing IRA campaign. But I've always been very conscious that the continuing efforts that we made to build Sinn Féin up as a political party had to be designed towards bringing about a process of negotiations which would deal with the issues that lay at the heart of the conflict.
The Armalite and ballot box strategy propelled the IRA and Sinn Féin through the 1980s, with both wings fervently committed to Irish unity.
The person elected to serve as member for the said constituency is Gerard Adams.
Gerry Adams was a potent illustration that Sinn Féin's strategy was working when he was elected to Westminster in 1983, just 2 years after the hunger strikes. It was an auspicious beginning to Sinn Féin's ambition of becoming the dominant political force, north and south.
It changed the face of nationalist politics on the whole island of Ireland and gave a type of emotional impetus to Sinn Féin for their planned political progress.
30 years on, Sinn Féin is now a mainstream political party, proud of its Irish identity and fostering Irish culture across all walks of life. Coming back to Belfast, I really get the sense that nationalists and Republicans are comfortable in their own skins. You've only got to look around to realise how much Irish culture and language have become part of the fabric of life.
We're very confident in our Irishness and our republicanism.
What's important is whether or not things have changed for the people, that they are no longer being treated as second-class citizens.
But not all Republicans sing Sinn Féin's praises.
Peter,
Gerard.
Long time no see.
Nice
Come
to see
in.
you. Has been a long time, hasn't it?
It has.
Gerard Hodgins was the last IRA prisoner to go on hunger strike. He's now totally disillusioned with the Sinn Féin leadership.
Just behind the power block of the city hospital, you can just make out Stormont, which gives me the opportunity, if I'm angry with them at any times, to come out and shake a fist at them and say, get on with it and do something.
But the people that you supported and fought for over all those years are now in Stormont.
I know, it's a crazy situation. We set out to be revolutionaries to overthrow the state. They ended up being caretakers of the state. It's a crazy way for things to turn.
But you shake your...
And a wee bit of anger, a wee bit of rage, 3,000 plus people dead was a hell of a price to pay just to become a part of the state you were supposedly trying to overthrow. We could have become a part of that state a long, long time ago.
It's not just some Republicans who are dismissive of the political establishment at Stormont. Most loyalists feel alienated too. Bonfires, flags and parades are the symbols of a British identity loyalists believe Sinn Féin is out to destroy.
This is loyalism, just raw loyalism. Sinn Féin seem to be dictating what exactly happens and what doesn't. Part of the problems for loyalism is democracy hasn't worked the same.
Working class unionists or loyalists in Northern Ireland actually feel that they haven't gained anything from a peace process. You will see educational underachievement, you'll see poverty, you'll see deprivation, you'll see all of those things. But as well as that, you'll see people whose culture has been trailed, away from them.
Grassroots Protestants once felt they had an iconic, charismatic champion who for years articulated their anger and fears.
Let it go out that we're cool, determined loyalists who will never surrender.
Extreme loyalism and unionism have always been synonymous with the late Reverend Ian Paisley, founder and former leader of the DUP, who played on the ancient fears of the IRA and popery.
Romanism has controlled in this land for many centuries, and Romanism has bred poverty and ignorance and priestcraft and superstition. Thank God for the liberty of the gospel.
Dr. Paisley became the thunderous champion of thousands of working-class Protestants and loyalist paramilitaries who saw every political move by the British in the direction of Dublin as a plot to destroy the Union.
We say never, 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 never.
From small beginnings, Ian Paisley built up the DUP to become the dominant unionist party, increasingly with the support of the middle classes, leaving many loyalists out in the cold.
Until that is address that and balance that, there will be serious problems.
Political parties with connections to loyalist paramilitaries have tried to make electoral inroads, learning lessons from the IRA and Sinn Féin, but with mixed fortunes.
It is very hard for us to get political support because we are seen to be connected to the UVF and we are seen as ex-prisoners.
The IRA made this journey from a gunman on the street, wee Paddy on the border with his AK-47, to being joint Prime Minister of Northern Ireland. And the Provies couldn't have made that journey from the bottom to the top. What would have happened? They'd still be killing people.
While Sinn Féin prospered at the ballot box, the IRA's Armalite strategy became increasingly audacious. In 1984, it struck at the heart of the British government, bombing the Grand Hotel in Brighton. The Industry Secretary Norman Tebbit narrowly survived. His wife Margaret was paralysed for life.
I have no sympathy for those who declared the war. But having said all that, one way or another, a ceasefire was achieved, and to that extent, it was a price that was worth paying.
The Brighton bomb was a major turning point in the war. Such a sophisticated attack prompted the government to recognise an uncomfortable truth, that the British could not inflict a military defeat on the IRA. I wondered if Lord Tebbit thought that affected the final outcome. Who won the war?
I don't think this was a war that was won. It was a war which ended in a truce.
By the end of the 1980s, both the British and the IRA realised that an outright military victory was impossible. Behind the scenes, both sides realised that the only way to break the deadlock was to talk. But the precedent for the government of talking to terrorists was not encouraging. The first face-to-face meeting at government level was held way back in 1972 at a minister's house in London's fashionable Cheyne Walk. The young Martin McGuinness and Gerry Adams joined the then IRA Chief of Staff at the negotiating table. All were IRA?
Yes, not Sinn Féin, but IRA.
All of them?
Yes.
Including Martin McGuinness?
Oh yes.
Including Gerry Adams?
Well, all of them.
Well, I'm very clear on this, and I have consistently denied membership of the IRA, although I've never dissociated myself.
But nobody
from the
believes
IRA.
it, Mr. Adams.
Well, that's fair enough. That's a matter for them.
When Unionists found out the meeting had taken place behind their backs, they were deeply suspicious.
There was a feeling of betrayal and very much, I think, igniting a feeling within the unionist community that they were on their own.
The meeting was disastrous. Republicans demanded a declaration of a British intent to withdraw by 1975. Neither side was prepared to negotiate.
Was it naive? What it lacked was a strategy.
When I reflect on that event, I rapidly come to the conclusion that the British government were never going to, in a bilateral way, negotiate the future of this part of Ireland with Republicans to the exclusion of all others.
It was to be another 2 decades before the British met Martin McGuinness again, and it was that meeting that was to lead to the historic IRA ceasefire of 1994. The IRA put out feelers in response to coded overtures from the British after John Major had become Prime Minister. Why did you make Northern Ireland such a priority?
People were killing one another. If that had happened in Surrey or Sussex or any part of the mainland, nobody would have tolerated it for a moment. It seemed to me to be equally intolerable in Northern Ireland.
Talking to terrorists was anathema to Conservatives, but John Major reluctantly accepted the only way forward was to engage with the IRA and loyalist paramilitaries. 3 days before secret talks with MI5 were due to take place, the IRA bombed Warrington, killing 2 little children. Incredibly, the meeting went ahead, although John Major himself was not aware of it at the time.
If the implication from the honourable gentleman's remarks are that we should sit down and talk with Mr. Adams and the Provisional IRA, I can only say to the honourable gentleman that would turn my stomach over and that of most people in this House, and we will not do it.
The angry part of me said I would never sit down. The pragmatic part of me, of course, would have done so had I thought there was going to be an outcome from any such meeting that would carry the process forward.
The government's chief point of contact to establish whether the IRA was seriously interested in calling a ceasefire was Martin McGuinness. Did you believe that Martin McGuinness was a member of the IRA's Army Council?
Yes, I did. If he couldn't deliver the IRA, then there would have been no point in talking to him.
Were you at the time of the negotiations on the IRA's Army Council?
No, but I was obviously someone who was trusted by the IRA leadership. And
weren't you part of it?
If you remember, no, I wasn't part of it at the time. For me, anyway, it's irrelevant what status the British government thought I had in regard to negotiations. It was clear that because there was a military stalemate and a political stalemate also, to us as the leadership of Irish republicanism, that somebody had to take an initiative which would break a very vicious cycle of conflict.
On the 31st of August 1994, the IRA declared its historic ceasefire, ending a campaign that had resulted in the deaths of 1,800 people.
It was probably one of the most challenging things I've ever been involved in my life, but it was hugely important.
In all sincerity, we offer to the loved ones of all innocent victims over the past 25 years abject and true remorse.
7 weeks later, on the 13th of October, Loyalist paramilitaries declared an equally historic ceasefire. Their campaign had been responsible for nearly 1,000 deaths.
Whenever we got to the ceasefire stage, it opened up a whole new vista and we could all see the world in a different way.
It gave a great boost to the belief in many people's minds that there was a deal that could be done. Many doubted it, but then there was a glimmer of hope.
The ceasefires laid the foundations for talks, now involving the Irish government. But John Major was only able to take them so far. It was left to his successor, Tony Blair, to finish the task 3 years later.
From the beginning, Northern Ireland was something I wanted to put at the centre of what we did.
He knew from the outset he would have to entice unionists into negotiations.
It's always important to try to talk. And then what matters is what you say.
The new Prime Minister embarked on a bold charm offensive.
The Prime Minister would like to speak to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed.
My agenda is not a united Ireland. Northern Ireland will remain part of the United Kingdom as long as a majority here wish.
Moderate unionists accepted Mr. Blair's offer. Reluctantly, they accepted Republicans would need to be at the table too.
The snag is that in order to bring them in, you had to bring in the people they regarded as their leaders, who are not such nice people to have there. But the overall objective of including people was right.
Good Friday, the Republican movement, Sinn Féin, embraced unionism, embraced loyalism. That was the key to Good Friday, wasn't it?
That is, of course, one of the key differences, and we developed a working relationship and we resolved problems.
In a momentous step for a British Prime Minister, Tony Blair invited Gerry Adams and Martin McGuinness to take part in inclusive face-to-face talks.
You've got to be prepared at a certain point to say, I'm going to risk everything for peace.
Did you believe that Martin McGuinness was on the IRA's Army Council?
I always saw the IRA and Sinn Féin as two sides of the same coin, if I'm honest about it.
So the answer is yes.
As far as I was concerned, I was talking to the Republican movement when I was talking to them. If I hadn't met Adams and McGuinness, if I hadn't been able to sit in front of them and see them and feel what type of people they were and where they're coming from, if I hadn't been able to have that personal engagement, I don't think we could ever have put this together.
An historic agreement for peace in Northern Ireland has been reached within the past few minutes.
After much burning of midnight oil, a settlement was reached. The Good Friday Agreement in 1998 paved the road from war to peace. But first, the DUP had to be coaxed into the tent. Given Ian Paisley's track record, the omens did not look good.
Ulster is not for sale!
For 4 decades, Ian Paisley was known as Dr. No. But in a wondrous turnaround, Dr. No was transformed into Dr. Yes, becoming First Minister and unbelievably sharing power with his sworn enemy, Martin McGuinness.
If you had told me some time ago that I'd be standing here to take this office, I would have been totally unbelieving.
How do you view the journey that Ian Paisley made?
I was struck when Ian came out of hospital after his illness that he had this sense and expressed it to me. He'd been through a near-death experience, he'd survived, and it should be for a purpose. And if the purpose was peace, and that was God's will as it were, then he should do that.
When it came to a point where he could see himself as the prime person in political life in the north of Ireland.
The Prime Minister?
Well, essentially that. He couldn't refuse. Never, never, never became yes, please, and quick.
People say it's terrible you've left the place in the charge of the extremes, but the interesting thing about extremes is once they're in power, it's very difficult to be extreme. When you're worrying about water rates and education, it's more difficult to be extreme than when you're waving a gun.
In 2007, Ian Paisley and Martin McGuinness joined forces as First and Deputy First Minister. The triumph of the extremes at the expense of the moderates.
Two men who've taken a leap of faith out of the past and into the future.
SDLP leader John Hume and Ulster Unionist leader David Trimble were awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for their efforts as peacemakers. But their respective parties were the greatest political casualties of the war. Is it hurtful?
Oh, very much. Very much. When you look at what we gave up, that we sacrificed to get peace, to get an end to killing. I find it hurtful, let's put it that way.
Do you feel that you've been marginalised and eclipsed by the DUP?
It could have been better. It may very well be. Maybe there were misjudgments I made, maybe there were misjudgments the SDLP made. But I'm not going to say it wasn't worth it.
Seeing Sinn Féin in power at Stormont brings home to me an unpalatable truth. It's there because voters put it there, the ultimate triumph of the ballot box. But it was the Armalite that paved the way by breaking the mould of the unionist state. Violence paid, isn't that one of the lessons? However unpalatable that may be.
Well, I mean, you use the term violence, it's a very pejorative term.
Well, it's about killing people, injuring people. That's what violence is. That's what the campaign resulted in.
Yes, but that's what the war resulted in. It would have been better that there was no war. But you show me anywhere in the world where people have won either a modicum of decency and rights, or indeed, in terms of colonial wars, won independence, that it didn't happen after bloodletting.
What did Loyalist violence achieve?
It prevented a united Ireland.
Why do you say that?
Because we don't have one. Violence was not the only thing, but it was one of the things that actually prevented it.
I think violence probably does work. It may not work quickly, and it may not be seen to be working quickly, but in the long run, one has to look back and say, yes, it did work.
What's the current state of your relationship with the Deputy First Minister?
No change.
Very good.
Not an inch and no surrender.
Whenever Ian Paisley and I went into government together, Ian said to me, you know, Martin, we can rule ourselves. We don't need these people coming over from England telling us what to do. And for me, that was common ground that we could all stand on. Don't be nervous about the WASP.
Martin McGuinness has potentially more dangerous things to worry about, not least small groups of armed Republican dissidents dismissive of the peace and determined to carry on the war.
peace has arrived, there are still people who are opposed to it, and they're small and they're unrepresentative, and they have no prospect of reversing the important change that has happened.
We gather today to remember our true friend and comrade Brendan Hughes. Stand out and start contrast.
Disaffected Republicans believe Sinn Féin has abandoned its holy grail of a united Ireland.
While their leaders dressed up in white ties and went to Buckingham Palace to have dinner with the English Queen, whose name is on every single charge sheet brought against every single one of us, which can send us to the prisons.
Who won the war?
Oh, the British. We lost. We just didn't get our United Ireland. And now we're pretending it wasn't about freedom, that it was really about equality. The IRA are too clever to tell the full truth of what was actually negotiated. And unionists are just too stupid to recognise the enormity of what they have achieved in bringing the IRA to a negotiated settlement which accepts the six-county state.
Our position is clear, and it will never, never, never change. Don't go, my friends. We will lead you to the Republic.
You believe that one day there will be a united Ireland?
I've never been as convinced of anything in my life that at some stage in the future there will be a reunified Ireland. Absolutely.
The IRA has not achieved that. Isn't that why you Republicans and former IRA volunteers are now rewriting history by claiming that the IRA was fighting for equality, which you've achieved, and that's a substitute for fighting for the IRA's real goal, which is the reunification of Ireland, which you haven't got?
The IRA were fighting to bring about the equality, yes, but also the reunification of Ireland. I'm still fighting for that, but I'm fighting for that politically.
This is a sight I thought I would never see. Little boys in front of Belfast City Hall playing the Irish national game of hurling. It's another sign that Irish culture and identity are now part of what was once a unionist state. Who won the war?
Well, the struggle isn't over. I believe we will get a united Ireland. I believe it has to be a united Ireland in which unionism feels secure.
I'm afraid Jerry's day is over. He's not going to get us united Ireland. It's just not going to happen. Unquestionably, we have come out with our objectives intact, but that isn't always the way it is seen on the ground, and unionists are capable of extracting defeat from the jaws of victory, and nationalists and republicans are capable of gaining victory from the jaws of defeat.
For years, Belfast City Hall was the bastion of unionism. In 1912, nearly 500,000 Protestants signed a covenant there in which they swore to maintain the Union, and for years the Union flag flew above on just about every day of the year. But all that has changed too. The flag can only be flown nowadays on designated days, and that's a bone of huge contention within the Protestant Unionist and Loyalist community. Since that decision was taken in 2012, there have been ongoing street protests. There are also protests on a different cultural issue: parades. The Flashpoint is a volatile interface in North Belfast, where Loyalists have been protesting nightly for more than a year. They're angry at restrictions placed on where they can march on the 12th of July. Nearby Catholic residents say the parade is triumphalist and sectarian. When I first started covering the conflict 42 years ago, Unionists were top dogs. They're no longer top dogs, and they feel that. For the past 2 years, there have been violent riots on the day the march was due to take place. This year, tensions were running high because restrictions had been placed on the march once again.
The more they attack our heritage and traditions, the stronger our response will be. Let them home.
The war has changed in how it's fought, but it's still a war and it's still going on. The IRA had a strategy. They wanted the Brits out. Now, unfortunately, the Brits that they talk about is me. It's not the British apparatus, because, you know, that has all been taken away. But we're still here, and that's why we still have the Republican movement engaging in a cultural war and trying to, you know, take away what vestiges of Britishness is left, and that includes us.
Let's see the guard.
You need to go set Liverpool City Halls and tell what? Nothing. What do you need to tell Peter Robinson? That he fucking sold us out. He has sold us out. We have. Sold down the fucking river.
There is real bitterness and resentment in significant sections of the Loyalist community. Can you understand that?
Well, I do understand it, and you know, on many occasions you can see that there has been a pandering to Sinn Féin. The reality, of course, is that the union is safe, but there isn't the same degree of understanding of the Protestant unionist and loyalist position, whether it's on flags, whether it's on parades, or whether it's on other issues of identity.
The parade today reminds me of the parades I watched in the early 1970s, but with one big difference. The parades that I watched then were parades by Catholic nationalists and Republicans who were protesting about what they regarded as their status as second-class citizens. The irony is that today, the Loyalists who are marching, the bands, their supporters here, now regard themselves as being second-class citizens. So there's a similarity, but a huge difference. Things seem to have gone full circle. In the end, this year's parade passed off without incident, the welcome fruit of protracted negotiations behind the scenes.
I hope there will be a recognition that politics must be seen to work to ensure that those who would advocate violence don't get any basis upon which they can argue that case and articulate it to the wider community.
This year's agreement over the sensitive parade is an encouraging sign that dialogue is the key to peace, just as dialogue produced the ceasefires and brought the conflict to an end. Who won the war?
No one won the war. The British and the Unionists were never going to be bombed out of the United Kingdom, and we were never going to be able by military force to destroy the Republicans. So no one won. On the other hand, I honestly do believe that everyone has won the peace.
It's been an exemplary journey in many ways, and when one looks at other parts of the world where the conflict seems irresolvable, one can realize that it is possible to bring together those who seem implacably opposed to one another for ideological reasons. And it is a gift of human nature that that is possible.
But the price for everyone, young and old, has been impossibly high.
Try and get up quicker.
40 years ago, I made a film about Divis Flats here in West Belfast. That's all that's left of the flats today. It used to be a death trap for the British Army. I remember interviewing a group of children who lived there. The memory of one has always haunted me. His name was Sean. He had the initials IRA tattooed on his knuckle.
Sean, how do you get on with the soldiers?
Don't like them. Never will like them. When I go up and go and fight against them.
I often wondered what happened to Sean because of what his aspirations were. This year, I finally tracked him down. He's now 52.
Sean,
Good to see you.
Sure. It's been a long time.
What?
It's been 40
40
years.
years.
40 years.
You haven't changed a bit, Peter.
13 years after I first interviewed Sean, he was sentenced to life for the murder of a British soldier. This is a clip from the film I made at Divis all those years ago.
And you say that you'll fight the soldiers, right?
When I grow up,
Why?
I'm going to fight for my country and die for it.
If I were to interview some children about the same age as you were when I interviewed you 40 years ago, and if one of those children said to me now that he wanted to fight and die for Ireland, what would you say to him?
I would advise him to forget it, because I know a lot of people who died and they thought they were fighting and dying for their country, but it never worked out that way. It never worked out.
So what did the IRA achieve in its so-called war?
They're running government, they're running storming.
But there's no United
No,
Ireland.
but we'll get there. I'm sure we will.
Why are you so confident?
I have every faith in Jerry Adams and Martin McGuinness. Full faith in them.
The tragedy is that generations of children have been victims of a conflict by which they were conditioned, some to become killers in the name of causes that fueled the war. So, what's my conclusion? Who really did win the war? Viewed through the prism of the present, it's clear that the British and the Unionists won, because the Union is secure and the IRA is no more. But nobody knows what the future may hold. The unimaginable has already happened, with Martin McGuinness up there at Stormont as Deputy First Minister and dining at Windsor Castle with the Queen. I wouldn't be surprised if at some stage in the long years ahead, a united Ireland did emerge. The danger is that people may forget what we've all been through. A past that the young know little about. The memories of that past may help ensure that we never go through it again.